Jamie's review of Dune 2. Watch it with the biggest screen and speakers that you can. I've figured out what it is that's wrong with Dune Part 2. Okay, straight off the bat. He's coming in hot. I've figured out what it is that's wrong with Dune Part 2. Why it is that I left the cinema with a niggling emptiness at the end. Ooh, that's interesting. The stories spend time developing this fascinatingly complicated scenario for the protagonist, Paul Atreides. Paul really wants to be a good person. He understands the risks of power, but as the stories develop, it becomes clear that the universe is going to be putting this into the test. That was my reading, not Jamie's spelling there. Putting this to the test and into the test. Firstly, it provides him with an unimaginable amount of power through both of his parents' factions and his influence over the Fremen people. Then he is witness to his family's betrayal and the slaughter of the people that he loved. And on top of all of that, it gives him his mum's permission to fuck shit up. There's the comedy.
Yeah,
comedy, everyone.
We got some in, a tiny bit.
So let's just kind of break that down a bit. So the story is developing, spend time, fascinatingly complicated scenario. So is this a bit of exposition around what the scenario is? He wants to be a good person.
The thing that I enjoyed about how it made this very complicated, especially like this moral question, like here's a big betrayal, loads of power, and your mum's permission. Like, what are you going to do about it?
Okay, nice.
I liked that. I thought that was cool.
Oh, you liked how it set the scene. Okay, carrying on then. Dune Part 2 explores the extent of his power and whether it corrupts him or not. The questions raised around the morality of how he handles it and what decisions he is going to make give you a lot to think and talk about, and I loved that. So this is what I like. I started it with I figured out what's wrong with Dune. Two goods and a bad.
Because it's kind of like a it was brilliant, but there was something missing. It was like a 10 out of 10, and then there was something detracting from it. That was kind of what I was trying to say with that opening line.
8.2. I know I was surprised because I gave it such a high score, but 8.2 is what would you say? You say 8's a great.
8's a great.
Right?
9's are just like the most ridiculous.
There shouldn't be
films.
many.
Yeah.
And I agree. There really shouldn't be. In my head, like something like 29s in your lifetime is probably
right. Exactly. And also, I was trying to account for the fact that this is an enjoyment rating, and that later on it's going to be given very, very high scores for how good the movie is.
Yeah.
So I was kind of counting for that a little bit.
On top of this, the films are directed by an individual with vision. This seeps into the details where everything is just right. And when you sit in front of a big screen and the costumes, the special effects, the sound design, the makeup artists, and the cinematography all sing together as an orchestra, it is a life-changing experience cinematically. So very, very in line with some of the stuff we spoke about at the end there, where as an experience, and in line with your title as well, watch it on the biggest screen with some big boy speakers. Unbeatable.
It's generation-defining level of quality of cinema.
And it sounds almost like we're being, we're exaggerating here for effect, but really, certainly from my experience, I can say that it was an amazing event for me to go
We've
to.
watched some of the greatest films of the last 100 years for this podcast, and even then, it's not often we talk about a film where we say, like, this is something different cinematically.
Yeah. I feel like with cinematic ones, on a tangent a bit, it almost has to be modern because I may be wrong here, but the idea behind being at the cutting edge of what people are doing right now is quite important.
The highest budget, with the highest special effects, and
and this shines.
But it has to be done tastefully, and that's what I tried to make clear in this review as well. Is like it's not just a shitload of money. It's a shitload of money given to somebody who cares and is passionate about it.
And like fantasy / sci-fi, packaged as one, has been a real graveyard for attempted good films. Is very tough.
You need passion, you need vision, you need skill, like the skill required to pull this off.
Part of it is because it's like there's such an alien concept that in order to ground those, it has to be perfect. It's very hard to do something that's ridiculous.
One detail is wrong and it will look terrible. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, for sure. So there've been loads of sci-fi films that have failed. Then you almost forget about them.
Yeah,
I'm trying to.
It's normal. It's okay for sci-fi films.
There was one that Wachowski's Jupiter Rising, Divergence, I think is supposed to be kind of shite. John Carter of Mars. There's loads they've happened which are rubbish, and they're massive budget. They're massive failures because it costs so much.
So much money.
But when a sci-fi fantasy film hits and you get to see it at the cinema, it is
generation
something else.
You talk about it amongst Game of Thrones and Harry Potter's and Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and all that.
There's things that people remember. Generation defined is a great way of putting it. So carrying on then, but whilst Denis and Frank were crafting these masterpieces, they forgot about Duke Leto, Duncan Idaho. We forgot his name, didn't we, before? Duncan Idaho, and the human beings in this story which were lost. I never really felt any of Paul or Jessica's pain for those losses, despite the film taking place immediately after the first one ends. And so the whole driving force behind the plot, which is really about what you would... something for revenge? Is that
what you would do for revenge?
What you would do for revenge. Didn't connect with me. Instead of feeling the pain from losing a father, I felt the frustration of a political loss, and so I didn't really care.
That really would have been in italics if somebody else. I didn't really care.
Okay. Mine was hers. I didn't really care.
I didn't give a
You know what, Denis?
No, it's like, I didn't really
Got it. That makes more sense. All right. You've put a bit of effort in, but I didn't really care because you forgot about Oscar Isaacs and his beautiful beard and Duncan Idaho
and his shit beard.
Weird face.
My boy.
Hello, my boy. So, all right, that point then, that last paragraph is something that you spoke about. We discussed right at the start of this.
Yeah.
How, because I had some answers for that, or my interpretation of why I didn't mind that as much. How do you feel about that now, having spoken about it?
Honestly, it remains completely unchanged because what I effectively am trying to touch on is the emotional response that I felt to the film at the time.
Yeah, it's fair.
And I didn't, and regardless of how many reasons you can give the emotional side of a film, it's just down to how your soul reacts to that thing and that story and that loss or that joy or whatever it is. And I still just didn't feel that powerful emotion around the story.
Sometimes you got to just call a spade a spade. We're literally talking about a film where the main purpose is to say, be careful of getting yourself swept up in seeing meaning in things where there aren't any meaning.
Right.
And what I've done, you could argue, is I've gone like, but there's a reason behind all of these things.
Yeah,
and so these because I'm swept up in it. So is it ironically...
That's brilliant.
Yeah, so...
Hot take from the Late Night Podcast. I like that a lot.
So I do get what you mean, and I think it's worth remembering that if you had a gut... We talk about our gut reactions here, and mine is higher based on the fact that I was swept up. Yours is
you're
low
emotionally invested.
You had a nagging thing, which we were kind of trying to... Niggling. that you were trying to think about. And then finally, you cap it off with, overall, this film is a masterpiece, but for me personally, I just wasn't that emotionally invested. And so my enjoyment score... there you go. We said exactly
it's
what.
It's an 8.2.
It's an 8.2.
Yeah.
I really liked that, by the way.
I
enjoyed the review. I enjoyed reading it as well.
Dude, yeah, that was good fun.
I quite liked that we did it after we'd spoken about the film.
So we could chat. I agree. I think we could do that again. I enjoyed writing it as well. I would say probably the main point that I've sort of come up with whilst we've been talking